Police departments across the country on high alert this morning as more groups speak out against ICE raids and immigration policies with protests across the country. Here's video out of Georgia, Kentucky, and New York City.
Organizers for many of these protests say they are standing in solidarity with Los Angeles. ICE agents arrested more than 100 immigrants here illegally during sweeps last Friday, prompting the unrest. Now, overnight, LAPD had buses on rotation taking people who are rioting into custody in droves. According to CNN, LA is home to one of the largest immigrant populations, with 1 out of every 3 legal residents born outside the U.S.
Now, here in North Texas, we have not seen this magnitude of protests like we saw last night since the death of George Floyd.
So a lot of questions this morning. Will there be an increased security around parts of the city? And will charges be filed for anyone arrested overnight at Margaret Hunt Hill Bridge?
That's where we find Natalie Haddad this morning. She is live. And Natalie, any lingering police presence after what we witnessed last night?
You know, Mark, all that is left here along Margaret Hunt Hill Bridge is scattered water bottles, some litter, face masks, even some graffiti spray painted along the side of the bridge that we cannot show on air because of the profanity and in some cases some of the threats that were written with spray paint. Now, the message from protesters last night was clear. They want an end to the mass deportation efforts of ICE and the Trump administration. WFAA crews were here, and with some of the protesters they spoke to, you know, these protesters told us that they are here for the people who can't be and for the people who have been here for many years.
I'm here to support people who are at risk of deportation from this administration. I'm here to stand up for people whose lives are here, whose businesses are here, whose kids and families are here, and they're terrified to do normal things like take their kids to school, go to the grocery store. This is unprecedented.
Now, this assembly you see here gathered around 7 last night. They were waving flags and holding signs. But what started as a calm protest grew tense as the sun went down and a group of people ventured onto the road near Margaret Hunt Hill Bridge at Beckley Avenue, if you are familiar with this area. Now, at one point, protesters threw water bottles and even a firework at police. Dallas police responded by declaring the protest an unlawful assembly and closed off intersections. Then by the 11 o'clock hour, officers in riot gear did move in using pepper spray balls to get people to disperse. We also witnessed, the WFAA crews also witnessed a man being tased and pepper sprayed and punched in the face. Now, our WFAA crews did see at least one person be arrested last night, still waiting on any final number of the arrests last night and if any charges will be made. I'll send it back to you in studio.
Yeah, thanks, Natalie. We mentioned kind of earlier, these protests pretty reminiscent of what we saw during the George Floyd protests back in 2020. I do understand that some of the police protocols, though, have changed since then. How is law enforcement approaching protests like these differently?
It really comes to how they are approaching protesters now, Mark. In in August of 2020, police changed their policies to make sure that if they are seeing an excessive use of force by other officers or force that is no longer needed, they would intervene. They also cannot make direct contact with someone, and those pepper spray balls like they used last night, they can use them in crowds, but no direct contact with a specific person. I'll send it back to you.
I'm Chris Sadeghi, and coming up at 6:30 in the wake of last night's protest, the Dallas Police Chief and the Police Oversight Board set to talk today, and we could get answers on how the police department could or could not help ICE if raids come to this city. That's coming up at 6:30.
Of course, looking forward to that from Chris Sadeghi, but this is all a result of the time on the campaign when President Trump made enacting the largest mass deportation in history and securing the border one of the staples of his second term. Now, back in April, Homeland Security says border apprehensions dropped 95%. And according to the presidential administration, more migrants here illegally are leaving voluntarily to avoid being deported. Federal officials say they've made more than 150,000 arrests so far this year. The White House says they are targeting the worst of the worst, with 3 out of 4 arrests involving people with convictions or pending charges.